Okay everyone, so this week we're going to discuss saddles and bits in much more detail. And so Mr. Snyder talked to you about bits, Tiari has come in and talked to you guys about saddles in class, but really our hope today is to show you some of those finer points that maybe you didn't get a chance to really view in class. And so we've got a ton of different bits laid out that we're going to walk you through, more than just saying this is a snaffle and this is a leverage bit. And then I brought a few saddles up here. My point is really not today to go through and say this is a cutting saddle, this is a barrel saddle, this is a reining saddle, etc. But show you how to evaluate a few things on various saddles, maybe what type of rigging they have, able to find what type of tree they have, is it sheepskin or synthetic, what's the liner on it, etc., and how to evaluate those. And so I've thrown a few things on the board that I would like you to look at and evaluate on any saddle that you come across and any bit that you come across. And after we kind of talk through a few of these finer points, we'll go through and we'll start showing you some of these various bits, and then at the end we'll look at these saddles. And so on saddles, just to talk about it first and what we're going to evaluate on both, one would be kind of type of saddle. Sure, you could say English or Western saddle. I want you to go deeper than that generally. And for that English saddle, is it a dressage saddle? Is it a close contact? Is it a jumping saddle? And then for that Western saddle, again, is it a barrel saddle, a cutting saddle, reiner, all-purpose, etc. Okay? And so you can first kind of figure out that classification or type. And then materials that are used, okay? And this is going to lead us into this next topic of, is this saddle going to be manufactured or custom? You would expect the materials in that custom saddle to be a much higher grade. Generally, it's going to be more supple leather, okay? But look at the materials that are used in that saddle, okay? Maybe it has rawhide on it. Maybe it's got a lot of silver decoration. But look at the materials that are used. That manufactured saddle, generally that tree is probably going to be a plastic polyethylene tree. Other things that might be on that saddle that are a little bit different than the custom, you might have a stiffer leather on that tree, the stitching's a little further apart, not much tooling or not much intricacy on it. And so I want you guys to start to kind of gauge whether it's manufactured or custom. We'll see what saddles I show you here in a bit. Sometimes we bring in some of these Martin saddles that, a little bit of combination, okay? They're not a full custom saddle, but they're better than just your average manufactured, okay? You can kind of pick and choose some pieces on them, and there's quite a bit of attention put into those saddles, but they're not a full-fledged custom. And so kind of starting to break those things down and figure out which one you think it might be. The rigging, this is going to be as it relates to a Western saddle. I'm going to show you 3 different types of rigging on the saddle itself, but I want you to evaluate and say, is it just a simple D-ring, or is it a inskirt rigging, or is it a flat plate rigging? Okay, that flat plate being the strongest of those 3, that D-ring being the weakest of those 3. Okay. The other thing I'd want you to evaluate on the saddle, and I'll show you how to do this, would be the type of tree on that Western saddle. Don't go cutting open any English saddles. I got one that's cut in half that I'm actually going to show you the inside of. But on that Western saddle, is it a polyethylene or essentially a plastic tree, which you would find on more of those manufactured saddles? Or is it a wood covered in fiberglass or a wood covered in rawhide? That wood covered in rawhide typically being the best and the strongest, okay? And so we'll show you how to evaluate that and find that on those Western saddles. I do want you to start to figure out whether if you have a broken tree or not, if you're buying a new used saddle, okay? You go in a saddle shop or you look on Craigslist or Facebook or somewhere else and you go buy a saddle, do make sure it's not something that has a broken tree. Maybe they ran over the saddle, maybe the horse flipped over backwards, who knows what, and you do want to check that on an English or a Western. And so when we pull these saddles out in a bit, I will show you how to test that on both an English and a Western saddle, and then we do have a tree that's broken for you that you'll be able to see. And then on the bits, okay? A few things that I want you to evaluate. We're going to walk through again, and it's going to be a bit overwhelming in the bits that you see today. Part of it is just to show you there's so much stuff out there, okay? And so you have to pick what's right for you and your horse, okay? And so the first, you could say type of bit. Sure, we could again split that into a classic. Do you think this is used more for an English discipline or Western? Some definitely are. But beyond that, is it a snaffle bit or a leverage bit, okay? We could also talk about various war bridles or hackamores or things that are used beyond that, but type of bit, again, snaffle or leverage. Materials that are used in the bit, again, is it stainless steel, is it a sweet iron, is it a copper, something that's going to encourage salivation, does it have decorative silver on it? We have some that have plastics incorporated or rubber incorporated in them, kind of that happy mouth bit, and so there's lots of different materials that you'll see. We'll point some of those out as we go through looking at these various bits. And then the other thing I want you to evaluate on any bit that you're picking up and you're looking at in your hands are what pressure points does it hit, okay? And so Mr. Snyder talked about a lot of those pressure points. We could mention the bars and the tongue. Again, I could also throw cheeks and corner of the mouth in there, but our snaffle bits really engaging bars and tongue. Now, they're not all the same, right? And so we're really going to look at a lot of these bits, and I want you to pay attention to the shape and the diameter of that bit and really see how that snaffle bit is going to affect that horse and the pressure that it applies, okay? You can have two snaffle bits that are very, very different in the pressure that they apply. And so they might both affect bars and tongue, but they might do that differently. As we talk about our leverage bits and we start employing that leverage, now we can all of a sudden talk about engaging pole pressure, chin groove, and we have the actual curb strap or curb chain on there, and then pallet pressure, okay? All depends on the height of that port, but we could talk about some various bits that we have today that will employ that pallet pressure, okay? The other thing that I want you to look at is we've got a few of these Western bits that we could hold up and we could evaluate balance of, okay? And talk about whether they're a straight hanger or whether they're over or under balanced, okay? And that's going to affect the signal of that bit and how quickly that horse then feels that engagement. And so we could evaluate that balance, and we'll show you that on some of these bits. And I can't stress enough again, look at shape and diameter of a lot of these bits as we go around. And so with that, we're going to start picking up some of these bits and walk you through things, snaffle and leverage, and then we'll talk about the saddles here in a little bit. Okay, everyone, so we've got a number of bits laid out here. You can see all across the table. Some are just bare bits, some have full bridles on them in the head stall. But we're going to walk you through a handful of different things. We got a lot of different materials that are laid out today. And so again, some might be classified more as that English, some more Western, but I really want you to look at the details of that bit and start to say what pressure points do they hit, etc. We've got a handful of snaffles that I could just start picking up right here and looking at, but they're all very different, okay? The one thing I want you to note with a lot of bits is, again, looking at things shape and diameter. We could see that with all these bits that we look at, but we could pick up just a few things that look very similar. And so we could pick up this bit, we could look at different materials. This is more of a nylon. This is something that we talked about, these happy mouth bits. This nylon is actually something that horses will chew on over time, and much like your dog has a nylabone, gets really sharp and rough. And so this horse is chewed all the way down to the steel. But again, if you have this, make sure you do check it and feel it. You might have to take a little file or rasp to it to get those sharp edges off. But again, it's changing the texture for that horse, okay? This is a much softer rubber that we have here, okay? Sometimes you'll see the straight bar and kind of that mole and mouth. This one's completely flexible. This here we have a pelham. We talked a little bit about a pelham in class. You see another pelham sitting right there, okay? Can be ridden with two reins. So this rein, essentially, that's attaching right here, controlling that horse and affecting the bars and the tongue. Well, all of a sudden we have our lower rein right here, and now all of a sudden we employ leverage and we get rotation, okay? And this purchase right here all of a sudden starts to rotate down and pull that head stall and apply pull pressure. We've got our curb chain that's sitting across right here, and that's going to push into the chin groove, okay? And so now we have a lower rein that we have a little more ask on. And so again, cool things that we have with various pellets, but we have so many different snaffle bits and various leverage bits laid out here. Okay, everyone, and so I just wanted to talk you through a few different snaffles and just really get you to evaluate the difference between some bits in various diameter and shape. And so we could look at a few things. I'm just going to grab a couple bits as we stand right here. We'll go over to this table right here, and I'll show you a few more. And we could lay them out in order. But again, they're all going to be classified as snaffle bits, but the shape and the diameter is different and is going to affect that horse and the pressure that's applied, okay? And so the first thing we could talk about would just be, sure you've got a regular snaffle here, broken mouthpiece, but we can change this and start to look at different shapes. You can have twists in them of all different degrees. Just because it has a twist does not mean it's the same. This one has a very slow twist to it, okay? And we can start to increase that twist and kind of the speed of that twist, if you will. And you see something like this, okay? We've gone smaller and a faster twist. This has more pressure that it is applying, okay? Now we go even smaller, okay? Thin little wire, okay? Copper is also a very, very small material, or excuse me, soft material, and so you can see how easily that bends, but this is gonna contour in that horse's mouth a little bit, but again, extremely thin wire, fast little twist to this, okay? And so all of these are snaffles but look at the pressure that's applied. Which one of these, again, applies the most pressure, more pointed pressure? This one right here, okay? We constantly will be telling you, again, a bit is only severe and is the rider's hands, extension of the rider's hands. You can do damage with any bit, but I want you to see the pressure that's applied. These are all applying pressure to the bars and tongue, but it's a different pressure. And so severity essentially is increasing and more pointed pressure is applied as we get a smaller diameter and potentially as we change that shape, okay? We can have some that are more of a corkscrew, okay, and really fast twist. We might look at some here in a bit that are a square shape, okay, so it's going to be more pointed pressure all the way around the edges of that bit. And so really start to focus on shape and diameter. A couple other things I'll point out and then we'll walk over to some other bits. We've talked about regular snaffles like this over here, and this is basically just our loose ring snaffle, O-ring snaffle right here. We've got lots of different ones that you'll see from various egg butts. This right here would be a full cheek, okay? And one thing I was just going to point out with this full cheek right here is, especially on our English, when we're using many times this full cheek right here, these little keepers right here, okay? And these little keepers are going back to that headstall and keeping this bit from just flopping around and having that rotation in that horse's mouth that you don't want. And so that's what these little keepers are designed for, okay? Couple other things that I would point out. Again, we have so many bits we could walk you through. This right here is a Kimberwick, okay? Kimberwicks are unique, and this is one of those that many people would look at and call it a snaffle bit, but you see it looks a little odd, okay, on the side pieces here. And this is something that you can employ a very small amount of leverage should you wish to, okay? And so if you just put your reins through the hole right here, it's gonna act and respond pretty much just like a snaffle bit. If you put your reins through these little notches that you would see basically right here, it's gonna allow you to then rotate that bit a little bit and have just a little bit of leverage, but you can see how short this purchase is. You're not gonna get a whole lot of pull pressure on this. You don't have a whole lot of rotation, okay? And again, you'd have a curb chain that goes across and attaches right here as well. But Kimberwick is a neat little bit as well. Again, we could talk for days on some various unique bits that we have. This right here could look a little crazy. This oftentimes referred to as a mule bit. And again, you'll see kind of bicycle chain bit, something referred to as. But again, everything has its purpose. Again, we could show you a lot of bits that are handmade. And I don't want to, caution you at, oh my gosh, this is a severe bit. Again, you have to realize what it's used for. You might look at a lot of spades and cathedrals and say, oh my gosh, what is that used for? Again, in the right rider's hands, I can do a lot more damage with this snaffle bit than somebody with that spade bit, okay? And so you just have to keep all that in mind. I want you to evaluate materials though. A lot of these that we've looked at are stainless steel. And we've got copper that sits right here. We've got a sweet iron that we sit right here, or have right here. This is gonna encourage salivation, much like this copper is going to encourage salivation, okay? That salivation hopefully making that horse a little more supple in the mouth. And so we'll walk over here and we'll show you a little bit more about maybe some various Western bits, talk you through maybe some of the various cathedrals, spades, correctionals, etc. So we'll go over here in a minute.
So I want to visit with everybody about some different snaffles, and I've got quite a number of different snaffles here. And so we're just going to compare, kind of go through and compare one snaffle from the next. Most of the snaffles that I have here have headstalls on them. And so I'll visit with you about a little bit about headstalls and how they may differ for you. Again, most of the headstalls I have on snaffle bits are going to be a brow band style headstall. And so they'll look like this. Okay, they'll have a brow band and then this secondary piece that will buckle and hold that headstall behind that horse's ears. That's called the throat light. But then I also have some headstalls like this is a single ear style headstall. So as that hangs on that horse, the right ear would go through that ear loop, and then the left ear will be in front of that headstall. I have several other. This is on a correctional bit, but it's still a single ear headstall. Again, the right ear is going to go through that loop, and then the left ear would go in front of that headstall. And then here's a third example of that. Again, just different styles, but functionality very similar. So again, here's a single ear headstall. That right ear would go through that split or that loop, and then the left ear in front. Like I said, both of those last two bridles there have correctional bits, so we'll visit about those here in just a minute when we talk about leverage bits. But I wanted to walk you through some different snaffles that you might see. So Mr. Brooks talked to you about a twisted wire. So just again, some things to evaluate. So we talked about materials, right? So when you're looking at this bit, it's going to be a stainless steel. Okay. Again, that cheek piece, this is going to be a loose ring. You can see how that ring will freely rotate around there. Okay, and then you can see the diameter, right, and the twist on that. You're also going to notice that if you hold this straight, you can see that there is some curvature to that mouthpiece as well. So as that sits in the horse's mouth, there's going to be a curve to it. You'll notice some of these other snaffles will have a straight or be straighter across that than some other ones. Okay. This little snaffle bit is, I have it as an example. It's not set up. I don't have a curb or reins on this particular one, but you can see, and again, I want you to think about how this might differ from the last bit we talked about. So again, loose ring, cheek piece, twisted wire here over the bars, but then over the tongue, we have this lifesaver feature. Again, just cowboy terminology. It's named for that candy lifesaver. But that's going to allow you to put pressure on the tongue, but it's going to be in a more diffuse manner than it would be on this last bit that we talked about, right? The pressure across the tongue on this bit is going to be quite a bit more pointed than it would be on this bit here. But the pressure on the bars is going to be, again, not exactly the same, but very similar. The diameter and the twist being very similar. And so, again, you can vary, even in just the snaffle, how you apply pressure to different parts of that horse's anatomy. And that's what we talked about in lecture quite extensively. Okay. Again, a couple other mouthpieces you might see in a snaffle. So again, this is a snaffle bit. We're going to talk about the cheek piece here. So you'll notice that this is a D, right? It makes the straight here on the side of the cheek, and then has that ring, has the hinge there. But this mouthpiece here is called what we call a nut bit, because these, again, with cowboy terminology, these are just nuts, and then there's some smooth washers there in between them. And so as that pressure is applied to the bars and the tongue, there are going to be places where it's a little more pointed, and then as they rotate, be a little more diffuse on the flat spots. And so that's going to have a little different feel than some other bits that I'll show you here in the snaffle. Okay, again, this is a brow band styled headstall, so we talked about that a little bit. This particular bridle has a set of reins on it, and so a set of leather split reins. When we talk about split reins, right, there's independent reins. The right is independent from the left, and so that's a pretty common feature on especially Western style snaffle bits. You can certainly have connected reins like we talked about, roping reins, that sort of thing. And then I just wanted to point out the curb strap on this particular snaffle. Again, that curb strap is just going to keep that bit from, if that horse was to open his mouth and you were pulling on one rein or the other, that rotating entirely through the horse's mouth and you having the cheek piece in the horse's mouth, that curb strap keeps that from happening. But I wanted to point out the material on this curb strap, right? That's a braided nylon piece of string, as opposed to some of these other ones that you'll see, and I'll point out here, that are leather, or I have a chain curb strap that I'll show you as well. Okay, again, I want you to keep that in mind as we start talking about leverage bits and we talk about pressure on the chin groove. again, the diameter and the material of that curb strap is going to affect how that pressure is applied. Okay, and so this next bridle I wanted to point out, again, as you start to evaluate things, you're going to have that headstall. Again, this is a brow band headstall, throat latch and brow band on this bridle. Okay, again, we'll talk about the curb strap. Like I said, this one happens to be leather, but it's rather narrow. Okay, and so on a snaffle bit, depending on the regulations, if you were going to show a horse, right, they have, most associations will have a regulation on how wide and what materials you can use and what's legal and what's not. So that's something that we haven't talked about, but that you need to be aware of, that there are going to be different associations that you compete in, or that have shows or that sort of thing. And they're going to have regulations on what you can and can't use. That doesn't mean that what you can use is better than what you can't or more appropriate. It's just what that association has deemed is legal. And so you're going to notice there's some things that in some associations are legal and some aren't, and it'd be the same material. So just be aware of that. Okay. I want to show you this bridle for a number of reasons. Like I said, we talked about the reins, split reins, the headstall, the curb strap. But then when we get to the bit, again, we have a number of snaffles that we'll show you. Again, this is a D-ring style, right? It rotates here. The flat part here of the D on the cheek, and then the ring. Okay. Again, this is a smooth snaffle, so it's a cylinder, right, or a round piece over the bar. There's that hinge in the middle. I believe we have some other smooth snaffles here. Let me grab one so that we can do a little comparison here. But just as an example, here, right? So again, this is a smooth snaffle here, right? The diameter of this smooth snaffle here in my left hand is a little larger than this smooth snaffle here in my right hand, or on top, right? The material is going to be different. So again, this lower snaffle bit, or the one in my left hand, is made out of stainless steel. This one in my right hand here is made out of sweet iron, and you can see how that's rusted, and that will increase or promote salivation, right? Again, talked about the ring style. This is obviously a D-ring, and this is a loose ring because that can rotate. Okay, so again, it's two smooth snaffles, but very different. Okay, the other large difference that I wanted to point out, right? Obviously, this doesn't have any decoration on it, right? It's a relatively simple bit as far as decoration goes. This bridle here, or this bit here, has quite a bit more silver on it. Okay, and so again, the difference in how those two bits work in the horse's mouth and how they apply pressure in these two bits is going to be quite a bit different, just because of the different material and the different diameters. But I've got some other snaffle bits that are sweet iron and the same diameter and a smooth D-ring, but they don't have the silver on them, and then this particular bridle does. And the only difference in those two bits is that one is significantly more expensive than the other. And so this particular bridle, because of that silver, is going to be quite expensive. I can get a very similar bridle, a very similar bit that has all of the same features for the horse, but is significantly less expensive. And so again, just because it has silver doesn't mean it's a better or worse bit, but it is going to change the cost of the material. And so that's something that you need to keep in mind. But I wanted to visit with you all about when we talk about materials and talk about silver or engraving, that's something that you can look for. Okay. A couple other snaffles we'll look at here real quick, and then we'll move on to some leverage bits. Again, another brow band split rein setup here. Okay, a little bit different style curb strap on this, a little wider. Again, a leather Because it's not a leverage bit, the diameter of that curb strap is not going to affect or change things. Like I said, it's just there to keep that bit from sliding through the horse's mouth. But when we get to leverage bits, I want you to be aware of that, because that will come into effect with the leverage bit. And so when we get to those, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay. But again, this is a twisted wire mouthpiece here. Quite a bit larger diameter than some of the other ones we showed you earlier. So again, compare that. This is a sweet iron. Again, you can tell that from the rust that's on there. Okay. The thing that I want to point out on this particular bit is the cheek piece. You'll notice this is a loose ring cheek piece, but the difference is that the material is quite a bit heavier, and so there's some added weight to that. And so as this hangs in the horse's mouth, right, there's going to be a different feel because of that weight. There's going to be continual pressure, right, more so on that tongue and bars, and even on the pole, just because of gravity, than there might be in a lighter made bit, right, that doesn't have that same weight. So again, it changes the feel, and changes not necessarily how the bit behaves, but again, how that pressure is applied, and how that bit feels in the horse's mouth. Okay. And then the last snaffle bit that I kind of want to show y'all and give y'all an opportunity to look. And again, my hope in showing you these snaffle bits is, you know, to this point, all these bits have been snaffle bits with split reins and a brow band headstall. And with the exception of that one, they've all had leather curb straps. And so from the outside looking in, they may all look very similar, but obviously all of these snaffles behave very differently because of the material and because of the diameter and the shape of that snaffle bit. And so this bit here, again, is a D-ring, right? Again, is a sweet iron. You can tell from that rust, okay? But the difference in this snaffle bit is that it's a square. And so whereas this bridle with all the silver on it was what we would call a smooth mouth, right, or a cylindrical shape, this bit here in my right hand is a square. And so you can see that there is an edge here that is not in this cylinder, right? And so that's going to make the pressure more pinpointed in that area, and then less pinpointed in that flat spot. And so it changes, again, the feel of that bit in the horse's mouth and how that pressure is applied excuse me, to the horse's tongue and bars and the corners of their mouth. Okay. So I want to talk to y'all a little bit about some leverage bits, and so we'll walk through some leverage bits here. I've got 3 bits right here that might commonly be referred to as a shank snaffle, and we'll talk about why you'd refer to them as a shank snaffle. But Mr. Brooks talked with y'all about this Kimberwick, right? It's a snaffle mouthpiece. All 3 of these bits have a smooth mouthpiece or a cylindrical mouthpiece, right? And again, because of where that hanger attaches here, and where you can attach your reins here, right, there is going to be that separation, albeit slight, in this Kimberwick that allows you to rotate that mouthpiece, right? And so again, you could refer to this as a shank snaffle or a Kimberwick, right, in the English disciplines, right? And so that's one example of that. Here I have another, right? Again, same material. Both the Kimberwick and this bit are stainless steel, right? This one, again, would be a more Western styled shank snaffle, but again, snaffle mouthpiece, cylindrical mouthpiece. Your hanger, excuse me, is going to attach here, right? This curb strap will attach here. And so then this ring down here would be where your reins would attach. And again, that's gonna allow that bit to rotate and employ pull pressure. There's gonna be pressure here on that chin groove, right? We talked with the Snaffle bits about some leather, right? And some nylon curb straps. This happens to be a chain curb strap, okay? Again, you're gonna notice that the diameter and the material is gonna change the feel on that, okay? We talked about different headstalls, right? With those Snaffle bits, most of those were brow band style. I have a couple single ears. Again, when we're talking about a leverage bit, the diameter and the material of that headstall, because you're going to employ leverage and pressure on the pole, right? That diameter of the headstall and the material is going to change that feel of that pressure, okay? We talked about purchase to shank ratios, right? And how that changes the amount of leverage that you have the opportunity to employ, right? And so when we talked about this kimber wick here earlier, right? There is a relatively short purchase and a relatively short shank, right? Here on this other shank Snaffle, slightly greater purchase and slightly greater shank length, right? And so those ratios are going to be critically important when you evaluate the amount of leverage that you have the opportunity to employ. Again, doesn't mean that you're going to do that. You can pull twice as hard on the kimber wick and half as hard on the shank Snaffle and employ the same amount of pressure. But you have the opportunity to employ more on that shank Snaffle, right? So this, again, would be a shank Snaffle, right? Cylindrical mouthpiece again on this one, okay? Couple differences on this bit. Obviously, this is a sweet iron versus a stainless steel, so you can see that from the rusting here, right? And then probably the greatest difference that you'll notice here is that the purchase to shank ratio is nearly a 1-to-1 ratio there, as opposed to that other shank Snaffle where it'd be a shank ratio of 2 to purchase of 1. And so that changes how this bit is going to behave, right? Again, your headstall will attach to this ring here. Your curb would attach to this smaller ring here, and then your reins here, okay? And so this bit is gonna behave significantly different from this bit here. And again, if you line up those mouthpieces, you can see the difference in the purchase versus the shank and how that's going to affect that ratio, okay? Obviously, just from a practical standpoint, and something that I want to point out, the curb strap that's on this is going to be significantly shorter than the curb strap that's on this with a greater purchase, because it just physically has a greater distance to go around since it's farther from that mouthpiece. So again, if you're going to interchange parts and pieces, you need to make sure that they work together and that they're appropriate for the equipment that you're using, okay? So that's just some examples of some shank Snaffles, okay? As we start to talk about some other leverage bits, we'll talk a little bit, we talked in lab or in lecture about a correction bit, right? And correction bridles are generally categorized by being a leverage bit that has 4 hinges. And so there's going to be a hinge here on the cheek piece, right? And then there's going to be a hinge here on either side of the port, okay? And so as that bit lays in that horse's mouth, it allows for that bit to curve around the tongue, right? This correction bit's going to have some tongue relief here where my middle finger is, right? The bars in this particular bit have copper on them. So again, different material from the stainless steel here on the port, okay? Again, little different shape, right? If this was a little bit taller, I would consider this a cathedral port, okay? In this particular correction, it's a little bit shorter, and so we would refer to this as an A-frame, okay? Again, that A shape, okay? Again, this would be a correction here as well. Again, there's a hinge here on the cheek piece. Okay, this has copper wire on the bars of the mouth as opposed to just a cylinder. So again, a little bit different there. Again, hinges on either side of the port, and then this just has a traditional rounded port, relatively low or medium height to that, and some tongue relief there as well. So again, some differences there to note. One thing I'll point out on this particular bridle, again, the chin groove is going to be affected by this chin strap. This is just a single chain, whereas on my previous correction, that A-frame correction, there's going to be a double chain. And so that pressure is going to be, although a similar material, right, in the chain, it's going to be spread out over a wider surface area. And so it's going to be less pinpointed there. And so again, just some different correction bits that you can evaluate there. And those are just two examples of, again, a plethora of correction bits that you might come across. Okay, here's another example of that. All right, here's another one that doesn't have a bridle, but again, be a correction bit. The cheek piece and the port both have hinges on them there. This one, the port happens to be copper instead of the bars. And again, that is going to affect how that bit functions in the horse's mouth. And so something that you can evaluate and then choose what is most appropriate for what you're doing and the horse that you're riding. Okay. Talk a little bit about some solid mouthpieces that you might find. So we talked about a correction bit, right? Has hinges on the cheek piece and the port. Okay. Then we have what's, again, commonly referred to as a curb bit. And so it might have hinges, or will have hinges here on the cheek piece, but not on the port. And so you can see as that hangs in that horse's mouth, that's going to maintain that rigid structure there through the horse's mouth, and only hinge here on the cheek piece. Okay, again, we talked about silver, right? And this particular bit has quite a bit of silver work on it. Other bits, other curb bits that you might find may not necessarily have that, but if the mouthpiece, the purchase and shank ratio, all the rest is the same, then the silver doesn't change how that bit behaves. It will change, obviously, the cost and the expense, but doesn't necessarily change how the bit functions. Okay. Talk a little bit here about a couple different California style bridle bits. And again, that's just a way to classify those. These are traditional California vaquero style bridle bits, and can be, or there is a predisposition for people to be very intimidated by them if they're not familiar with how they function. But again, based on how we've talked about bits here in class, you can start to break these bits up and see how they function in the horse's mouth, and how, if a horse is prepared for that, how they might be able to respond and get along quite well, and get along better in this style of bit. And so a couple things I want to point out to you. This bit here in my left hand, that mouthpiece is referred to a half breed. Okay, and then this bit here in my right hand, that mouthpiece and that style would be referred to as a spade. And there's some historical reasons for those names. And again, if you all are interested in that, I'm happy to visit with you. But again, there's some long-standing history behind the names for those bits and why they're termed that way. But a couple things I want to point out. Again, both of these bits have solid bars across the mouth. Very similar diameter between these two bits, but again, you could change that if you so desired. There's no tongue relief on either one of these bits, right? Because that port has that solid bar across the center. Both of these bits have rollers, okay, and so you'll see one has a sweet iron here in my right, and one has a copper roller. Again, both to encourage salivation, and as that horse moves that roller and moves their tongue, that's gonna work that horse's mouth and jaw and help to relax that horse's jaw muscles, okay? We'll talk a little bit more about this spade here in my right hand, just because it has a few more pieces in that mouthpiece, right? We have these braces here, okay? And those are, again, made out of copper. They're gonna sit across the bars and here closer to the port, gonna come in contact with that horse's tongue, and so that will help to increase salivation. And then we have this spoon here on the top of that port, and so because of the height of that port, right, then you are going to have the opportunity to impact that horse's palate and either apply or relieve pressure from that horse's palate. And so as this bit sits in the horse's mouth, and you can see how when I hang this bit, you'll see that how that horse's mouth, if you can picture my hand here, is going to be over that. As that horse would to stick his nose out, right? Well, then just from the weight of the bit and the action of this bridle, right, there's going to be some pressure here on the palm of my hand, or in this scenario, what would be the palate of that horse's mouth. And then as that horse would bring their nose back, right, and carry itself in a more collected or more athletic position, right, well then you can see here, then that pressure would be relieved, right? And then if they get over bridled, right, well then there would be some pressure on the tongue from the backside of this spoon. And so this bit is designed to encourage that horse to be in an athletic position without the rider having to pull on the reins. And so if you understand how the horse's anatomy functions and how the bit is designed to function, then again, that misconception of intimidation to me is a lot less. It's a very appropriate bit if that horse is prepared to understand how to yield to that pressure, okay? A couple other things you can notice on this bit, again, quite a bit of silver work on this bit, right? There is a hinge here to the mouthpiece, but because of what's called the slobber bar here, and the way this bit is built, the hinge is essentially just to help the maker build the bit and put it together in pieces. It doesn't allow that to move any great deal, okay? There again is a slobber bar here, right? You can see that the shank to purchase ratio and what that would be. And then the last thing I want to mention about this particular bit is that it has what are referred to as rein chains. And so your reins would attach to the end of these chains, and those allow for some additional weight to the end of your rein, just like a weighted split rein or a weighted leather rein, where one end would be thicker than the other. So that changes the feel, right? And traditionally, this style of bit would be ridden in a continuous rein, referred to as a rommel. You could certainly ride them in split reins if you desired, but because that mouthpiece is not broken, right, it's not as independent left from right, and so riding in a set of reins where the left rein was independent from the right is not as functional as it would be in a snaffle or a bit where the mouthpiece was hinged and the left was more independent from the right, okay? One other California style bridle bit that I'll show you here would be what's referred to as a Mona Lisa. Again, all of these names have some historical significance, but don't expect you to memorize those. But this bit, again, you'll see that slobber bar, the silver work, okay, that purchase to shank ratio, all those things that we've been talking about, okay? Again, this piece here is merely for decoration, and so your curb strap and your hanger would both go to this upper ring, and then your reins would go to this lower ring. This particular bit doesn't have rein chains on. You could put some on there if you so chose, and if that was help the functionality of the bit for you. Again, sweet iron and copper, right? You'll note that this has a roller. So very similar to the half breed that I showed you previously, right? Okay. The greatest difference here in this Mona Lisa and the half breed, right, is going to be this copper hood that goes over the front. And so that again is going to change the feel of that and have slightly different pressure as it is rotating in the horse's mouth. Okay. Yeah, last thing we'll visit with here about shank bits, talked a little bit about balance, right? And so as you're looking at these bits and you take the headstall and the reins off, right? You can place your fingers here in the bars and see how that balance is affected depending on how the weight on that bit is distributed and whether that bit is a straight hanger or it is over or under balanced, right? We talked about that's going to affect the signal, and so that's going to determine how much that bit rotates and how much that mouthpiece rotates before that pull or curb pressure comes into play. And so again, you can see here on these two bits have slightly different balance. If I can pick up a third one here, see if I can get 3 at a time. May not have long enough fingers for that. There we go. Right, but you can see in these 3 bits, they all have slightly different balance points, and so they're going to rotate slightly more or less before that pull or curb pressure is employed. Okay?
Hey everyone, so we've gone through a good number of bits. Hopefully you have a better idea of some various snaffle bits, some leverage bits, some materials, what pressure points they might affect. I want to talk to you a little bit more about some saddles. So I've got 3 Western saddles here, a couple English saddles. My goal is not to say this is a cutting, this is a close contact, etc., but more to point out a few key things that I want you to pay attention to on some saddles. And so really I want to point out on these different types of rigging that we've discussed, making sure you know how to find those, whether the liner on these is synthetic or real sheepskin, how you might determine that, and then testing the tree on these, and how to also figure out what type of tree it might be. And so we'll show you a couple of things on this first saddle right here, okay? And so first things first, this is a D-ring that we just have sitting right here, okay? You can see a loose D in this video right here. And so anytime you see this loose D like this, move it around and everything, this is just a D-ring rigging. This would be the weakest rigging of the 3 types that we've discussed with Western saddles. The other thing that I want you to know how to look for is the type of tree on that Western saddle. And so if you lift the stirrup up, just like we've done, and you look up underneath, right here, it's not much, and you probably can't really visualize much with the camera, but right under here you can see that tree, okay? This is a wood covered in fiberglass tree, okay? And so I encourage you to look at various saddles. When you look at a wood covered in fiberglass, you're going to see kind of this crosshatch appearance of the fiberglass over top of that wooden tree, okay? This one right here, this is our barrel saddle, okay? A couple things to point out and note on this barrel saddle, okay? One of which is the fact that this is an inskirt rigging, okay? This D-ring right here that you see, don't call it a D-ring solely, but this D, this ring that you see, is literally riveted into the skirt itself, if you look at that, okay? There's no extra piece, okay? It is literally riveted into the skirt of the saddle, makes it an inskirt rigging, okay? And so this one, kind of medium strength between this one and the next one we'll view, but this allows for very close leg contact because there's not extra pieces sitting in there. Now, we look under the stirrup fender at the type of tree that you see, and again, you're only going to get a glimpse of it up under here. This one, you can see it's wood covered in rawhide, okay? And that wood covered in rawhide, when you look at it, you will see the rawhide up over top of that tree, and then you will see it stitched together where the 2 pieces of rawhide come together on the edge of the tree, okay? And so that's the one thing I want to point out there, okay? The last saddle that I have right here for the Western is this big old ranch saddle, okay? So, ranch saddle typically doesn't have a Cheyenne roll. There's no Cheyenne roll back here, as you see the Cheyenne roll in both of these, okay? Now, a lot of ranch saddles, common for this. The type of rigging on this is a flat plate, okay? This flat plate would be the strongest rigging of any of the saddle riggings we've discussed, but you see this massive double-stitched piece of leather right here. Here's the skirt way under here, okay? But big double-stitched piece of leather, and again, this is very, very strong. This double-stitched piece of leather goes up over top of the saddle and then comes over on the other side, so very, very, very strong, okay? You could look at the type of tree on this, and if you looked in here, you'd see that this is, let's see, this is a wood covered in fiberglass tree, okay? You see that cross-hatched appearance. And so the other thing that we could point out in terms of looking at things on various saddles is if you take that saddle and you peel back just the corner edge a little bit of the liner on the back of your Western saddle, okay? Right here, we can tell that this has a leather backing, so this is true sheepskin, okay? Means this is a sheepskin liner that you see, okay? Because it has a leather backing. This one, okay, not that you're gonna be able to see, but you'll see the process. I can peel back the corner a little bit. There's no leather backing, okay? It's essentially just this cross-hatched appearance. It's a synthetic liner, okay? So this one's sheepskin, this one's synthetic. Start to put all these things together and maybe determine whether you think a saddle is manufactured or custom. Last thing I want to show you here in a minute is how to check for broken tree, but I do want to show you this English saddle, okay? This is one that we have cut in half and was a saddle left over from a consignment tack sale, but you can view the inside structure of the tree inside that saddle and how it's actually put together and made up. And so not all saddles are going to be the same, but I think it's pretty cool to be able to see the inside structure of that and what's actually underneath the seat and the cantle, okay? So last thing I want to show you is how to check to see if your saddle has a broken tree or an intact tree for that matter, okay? And so we'll use our barrel saddle for our demonstration here, okay? So we have to check this saddle in two different axes, okay? It's a little more cumbersome on a Western saddle because it's bigger, okay? And so the first thing we could do is put it down on the horn and the pommel. We could just simply take a knee and press on the back end of that saddle, the cantle of the saddle Cheyenne roll. And if it's broken, you're gonna see a massive flex in that direction. This one, not broken in that direction, okay? Next thing we could do would be to lay the saddle out like so, and then stick a leg on it and a knee on it. And again, there's no real flex. You'd see if it's broken in this direction when we do that, okay? So you're checking both axes, okay? This one, not broken, but be sure you check both as Western English saddles. This one, a little bit easier to do, okay? So we could check in that same axis, so this way, to see if there's anything broken. We can pull this towards us. Nothing broken in this direction. Now, we put it here, it's a little easier with this lighter English saddle. All of a sudden now we pull it towards us, and whoa, you see that flex? Shouldn't do that much, okay? When you do that, you can also see it cracking right here, okay? This saddle does have a broken tree, okay? And so just so you can see the difference in what that looks like, make sure you check your saddles. Again, you don't always know if you buy a used saddle with a past, where it's come from, etc. And so with that today, again, I hope you have a little bit better knowledge on saddles, some tack and equipment, lots of different bits that are out there on the market. You're going to be overwhelmed in the future in choices. So you have to figure out what best suits you and your horses. And so with that, talk to you guys next time. Thanks.